Rain poured over the city like a punishment the skies had been holding in for days, flooding streets, choking drains, and turning every corner into a cold reminder of how harsh life could be. And Aisha ran through it with her breath breaking in uneven shivers, her palms tight around the strap of her son's backpack, her dupatta plastered to her soaked hair as she whispered prayers she wasn't sure anyone could hear anymore. She had left the office only 20 minutes earlier, but in those minutes her world had collapsed all over again, starting with the moment her manager publicly humiliated her in front of the entire payroll department, scolding her as if she were a child who couldn't follow basic instructions, even though the mistake had never been hers, even though she had stayed late every night for a week to fix everyone else's errors, even though she was a single mother trying to earn enough for school fees and an electricity bill that kept rising like a threat. Yet none of that mattered to a man who saw her as replaceable, invisible, weak, and she remembered how her vision had blurred, how her ears had filled with the quiet ringing sound of embarrassment when the laughter of her coworkers echoed behind her as she walked out with her head down and her heart burning. Now the bus stop shelter was nearly empty when she reached it, her breath fogging in the cold, water dripping from her sleeves, and the weight of the humiliation pulling her down until she could barely sit upright. So she collapsed onto the cold metal bench, covering her face with both hands as if hiding might somehow undo everything that had happened, and for a moment she let herself break, really break, without worrying about who might be watching, without pretending she was strong, because she was tired of being the mother, the father, the provider, the protector, the worker who never complained, the woman who swallowed everything so her son wouldn't see her fall apart. But she was falling apart now, silently, painfully, her tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks until it was impossible to tell them apart, and she didn't even realize how long she stayed like that until she sensed someone approaching, a presence warm enough to cut through the cold, a quiet shadow that didn't belong to a stranger passing by. She looked up just slightly, and through the curtain of her soaked dupatta she saw Daniel, her neighbor, the single dad who lived 3 doors down, the man she had always admired from a distance because he carried a calmness she wished she could borrow, a gentleness rare in this loud world, the man whose daughter, little Mira, often smiled at her son on their walk to school. And now Daniel stood in front of her with rainwater dripping from his hair, his jacket missing because it was wrapped around his daughter sitting on his hip, his umbrella tilted awkwardly to shelter all 3 of them, and his eyes held something she had not seen directed at her in a very long time. Genuine concern, not pity, not curiosity, but quiet, steady concern that didn't demand an explanation. She felt her breath choke again and she immediately pulled her dupatta tighter over her face, turning away, whispering, "Please, don't look at me," because shame had a way of convincing her she didn't deserve to be seen, not like this, not broken, not vulnerable, and she braced herself for him to step back, to say nothing, to pretend he hadn't noticed, but Daniel didn't move away. Instead he knelt down to her level, shifting Myra's weight in one arm while lowering the umbrella so the rain wouldn't fall on Aisha anymore, and his voice, deep, warm, impossibly steady, filled the cold air as he said, "Aisha, don't hide from me," and those words, soft as they were, hit her harder than the manager's shout, because they held something she wasn't prepared for, kindness, the kind of kindness that made her walls tremble, the kind that made her chest ache because she'd forgotten how it felt to be spoken to as if she mattered. She shook her head quickly, her voice cracking as she whispered, "I'm fine, please, just go, I'm fine," even though she clearly wasn't, even though the tremble in her shoulders betrayed her, even though her son wasn't even with her right now. He was in school, unaware that his mother was drowning not in water but in exhaustion. Daniel didn't argue or ask questions or tell her she wasn't fine. He simply shifted closer, gently extending a hand. Not touching her, just offering, silently, patiently, the way someone offers a lifeline to a person who's too afraid to admit they're sinking. And for a moment she considered taking it, but before she could respond, Mira reached out with her tiny hand, tapping Aisha's arm with an innocence that had the power to cut through any darkness, whispering, "Auntie, don't cry," and something inside Aisha cracked so deeply she almost doubled over. Because children never pretended, children didn't lie, children saw truth without judgment, and in that small voice Aisha felt a softness she had been starved of for years. Daniel adjusted the umbrella again, letting the rain fall on him instead of them, and said quietly, "Come with us, we're going home," and Aisha stared at him in disbelief because no one said things like that to her. No one offered shelter or warmth or presence without expecting something in return. No one made space for her pain without turning it into gossip or a burden. And her voice trembled as she whispered back, "Why? Why would you help me?" But Daniel only gave a small, gentle smile, the kind that didn't push, didn't pry, didn't pretend to know what she was going through. And he answered, "Because no one should stand in a storm alone." And those simple words were enough to melt the final piece of resistance she was holding onto. She exhaled shakily, nodding without lifting her hands from her face, and allowed Daniel to guide her from the bus stop. Myra's small fingers wrapped around her own as though she were leading them instead. The walk back to their building was slow and quiet, with Daniel shielding both women with the umbrella while he himself stayed exposed to the rain. And Aisha kept her gaze downward, afraid to meet his eyes because she didn't know what he would see in hers. Weakness, shame, the tiredness she had hidden from everyone, or maybe the lingering hope she had buried under years of survival. When they reached the building entrance, Daniel held the door open and let her step inside first, turning to wipe his daughter's wet hair with the edge of his sleeves, his movements so tender they made Aisha's throat tighten again. His apartment was warm, softly lit, carrying the smell of cinnamon, milk, and something comforting she hadn't felt in a long time. Home. The feeling of a home that didn't carry shouting, fear, or disappointment. A home where children laughed and adults spoke gently, where warmth existed without conditions. And Mira guided her to the couch with a bright little smile, saying, "Papa makes hot chocolate when people are sad," as if it were a rule written in stone. Daniel hung up the umbrella and glanced at Aisha with the same quiet understanding, asking softly, "Sit, please, you're freezing." And though Aisha hesitated, clutching the soaked backpack with stiff fingers, she eventually obeyed because she didn't have the strength to pretend anymore. Not today, not when she could still feel her manager's words echoing like bruises inside her chest. And as she sat, her heart thundering in the stillness of the room, she watched Daniel move around the kitchen with practiced ease, preparing 2 mugs of hot chocolate, one for Mira and one for her, while letting the moment breathe instead of filling it with questions she wasn't ready to answer. The warmth of the mug spread through her cold palms like a small mercy, and for the first time in months she felt her shoulders loosen, her breath steadying, her pulse slowing down from the frantic pace of survival. She didn't tell Daniel what happened, not yet, but she didn't need to. Some people didn't need the full story to offer kindness, and he was one of them, the rare people who understood that sometimes the strongest thing someone can do is simply sit and accept help. As she finally lifted her eyes, meeting Daniel's for the first time since the bus stop, she felt a shift, subtle, profound, terrifying, a shift that whispered this moment was not small, not insignificant, not forgettable. It was the beginning of something neither of them had expected, something she was almost afraid to acknowledge, because it felt too good, too gentle, too safe, and she had forgotten what safety felt like.